We back in the era of Attitude. This time we're deep in 1999 where things were moving at a very fast pace. It's obviously a broken record to say, but I love the era most for the identities each wrestler had. Even though they were all douchey, they were very distinctive. You had everything. Vampire, man's man, and then there's a dark, cruel leader by the name of The Undertaker. Considered by him as the worst point of his career, he took leadership and control of several men, all in the name of an unknown higher power. The Ministry were out there hanging people, doing blood rituals, blood baths, and nothing could stop them. They had to deliver on this in a grand way, and I already made something on the original Ministry from January of 1999 to April, and we're picking up right where we left off. But before the video starts, let me give a quick rundown as to how things got to this point. So, in late 1998, The Undertaker turned heel and developed this darker persona. He was constantly talking about this ministry that he had. Even though there was no members, The Undertaker was still doing some wild things, such as attempting to embalm Austin or sacrificing him. Once he was buried alive and made his return, The Undertaker came out sporting a beard. He started wearing this big-ass robe, and he started recruiting followers. Soon enough, he had about 9 of them under his belt, and this caught the attention of Vince McMahon because The Undertaker was talking about how he wants to own the World Wrestling Federation, and he was doing all of this for a higher power. It got to that point where McMahon had to focus not on Stone Cold Steve Austin, but on The Undertaker. And the Dead Man was doing all kinds of things, handing him a teddy bear, visiting his house, and he was constantly referencing she. Who was she? Ended up being Stephanie McMahon, and by backlash, he finally abducted her and had the Black Wedding. He wanted ownership of the company and would only let Stephanie go unless Stone Cold Steve Austin handed him the papers directly. Austin does come out, but he doesn't bring the papers with him and instead saves Stephanie, and that's the Ministry story in a nutshell. Here, met something else. On the very first SmackDown episode, April 29th, 1999, Mr. McMahon kicked off the show to address the events of Monday. Before he could properly speak, Shane McMahon and the corporation interrupted. Since the Boy Wonder had a hell of a lot of leverage, he was able to get rid of Father Vince. This was because of the circumstances of the confrontation, but nonetheless, with the ring cleared, Shane addressed the two people that frustrated him most in recent weeks: The Rawk and Stone Cold Steve Austin. He knew very well that these two despised each other and thought it would be best to have them team up. Triple H on the other side was the first volunteer to challenge those two, and while there were others that wanted in, McMahon wanted takers. Obviously, he's referring to The Undertaker. He was seething over Monday and how Austin caused chaos. This is the first time in about 5 months that Austin and Taker crossed paths. You know, they're kept apart for the longest time up to this very point. However, in that time, a lot happened, especially on The Undertaker's side. So the match was confirmed. It was going to be Rawk and Austin on one side, and the other, Triple H and The Undertaker, which sounds ridiculous. There's just too much star power. Fast forward to later that night, The Rawk was in the ring and he's mad over. The Great One warned Austin about double-crossing him and promised to whoop his ass if that were to happen. A few seconds later, the WWF champion was here. He threatened Rawk before Shane McMahon interrupted. This man was salivating at the thought of those two fighting and felt it was the perfect time to unveil his plan. Lights go out, and once again, The Undertaker was here. This time, though, he was side by side with Shane McMahon, but not only him, though, the rest of the corporation and the ministry. They could barely fit on the ramp, and for some reason, it's hilarious to think that the Mean Street Posse were associated with The Undertaker. It just sounds random, as if I were in the group or something. You know, they're out there wearing sweater vests, and the others were donning black colors. Makes for a funny visual. In other places, Ken Shamrock beat the living hell out of Bradshaw for what he did at Backlash, but on the topic of the main event, it was a very uphill battle for Austin and Rawk. They didn't lose, but the match turned into one of the Attitude Era DQ things where chaos is caused. The rest of the ministry made a run before the ex-corporation members made the save. McMahon leveled his father before taking a mean-ass chair shot from The Undertaker. This led to Austin stunning the Dead Man and catching Shane with one as well. So even though they formed the group, Austin ran through them like they were jobbers. Later that week on Heat, they showed that the group ain't no joke and attacked the likes of Mankind. But the Big Show was able to get rid of him, and already he called out The Undertaker. The Dead Man was no coward, and he was down to do battle. Just not alone. This only pissed off the Giant, who was so scary that Shane McMahon called the police on him. In the meantime, it destroyed the ministry's limo, and it happened just in time for the police to take notice. Shane confidently walked down to the ring in order to address the biggest problem of them all, that being The Rawk and Stone Cold Steve Austin. With the Great One, Triple H was the perfect candidate to shut him up. As for Austin, he's facing The Undertaker for the title, and you could smell the corruption come into play here as Shane McMahon booked himself as a special referee once again. Before ending the promo, McMahon dared his father to come to Raw. Next night, the team kicked off the show, but this time around, Shane spoke about a bunch of things. He insulted the fans for living paycheck to paycheck. P. Gas was loving what he heard, and again, they look so out of place. Shane also flexed on about slapping his father before handing the mic to Triple H. He started trashing The Rawk before confidently predicting over the edge in his favor. Let's skip a bit. Taker, who was too good to hold the mic, said that he purposely let Austin go. He talked about how he'll be the executioner and promised 3 things. He'll take his title, beat him like never before, and third, is going to be the ultimate sacrifice the next night on Raw. Clearly, he doesn't remember what happened last time around. All of a sudden, the 4 ex-corporation associates appeared and Foley said that they're disgruntled former employees. And oddly enough, the group was called Union. A lot of people really like to mention that name, the Union, because it's ironic. And anyways, Big Show was pretty damn close to bursting out in anger. Then all of a sudden, Foley's like, let's go and grab some balls. What? Upon hearing this, the big ministry guys didn't get any wood. With that said, Shane McMahon took the reins of the show and started doing some rebooking. Vince finally had enough of this and tried to put a stop, and at this point, there wasn't any idea of Shane McMahon's business with The Undertaker. It's obvious that they were doing this for their own good, but this was when Shane decided to drop a bombshell. First of all, he still wanted the match, citing the box office draw. His mother begged him and he quickly shut her up, and the intensity here, wow, that's another story. After Vince left, Shane opted to reveal that he was the one who orchestrated the abduction. Not only that, but he did everything previously. From the envelope, to the teddy bear, to the house visit, all of that was Shane McMahon's doing. McMahon tried doing something about this, but he couldn't even lift his hand. Even though he took a huge beating, the match was on. Now, the matches that Shane McMahon booked for the ministry, they failed to make good on it. Nonetheless, Shane was ready for the match, and he even had the game and the dead man attack his father. After bragging endlessly about having the match won, McMahon finally made an appearance. This man took a beating like he was the 99 Knicks, yet came back and dropped Shane with a stunner. Mankind, this image says it all. Big Show, he was knocked out with ether, and Taker cracked a baseball bat on his head. All that was left was Austin and Rawk in a ministry lumberjack match. Unlike the previous matches, the rest of the roster made their presence felt. This left the Big Four all alone, and the fans were going wild here, but that would be shut down when Austin and Rawk were thrown off this stage. So basically, within a week of forming, the corporation and the ministry showed that despite their huge differences, the motives and the goals were the same, that being to take over the WWF. Around the end of Heat on Sunday, a very incensed Rawk came out to finally offer his thoughts on Monday. He guaranteed to be over the edge in order to entertain the millions and millions of fans, and upon hearing this, the game responded. He had zero remorse and took a page out of his book saying, Rock's ass is grass. So the Great One asked the ministry to be the lawnmower. He didn't suffer for long enough though, because the Union made the save. As for the McMahon drama, well, it came to a head in a huge way. Shawn Michaels made an extremely rare appearance on the May 10th episode of Raw. Funny enough, Brock Lesnar shows up more nowadays than HBK did as commissioner. Anyways, he made some changes. First up, Shane wasn't the only referee at Over the Edge. Vince was now a ref as well. Farouk and Bradshaw, they're going to face off in a ministry lumberjack match. Test was going to face the Big Boss Man in a nice stick on a pole match. The Mean Street Posse against Patterson and Briscoe. Shamrock versus China. Big Show against Paul Bearer, and the man fainted. Viscera and Midian against Cactus Jack, and best of all, The Undertaker, Shane, and Triple H against Rawk, Austin, and Vince himself. The special referee for this one was Shawn Michaels himself, who was not in San Antonio, as it was a pre-recorded promo. About the Paul Bearer match, yeah, Big Show was wearing jeans, so he wasn't worried, He was confident. He was so confident that he wanted the lanky dead man to come out. This almost went awry, but once again, the Union was here. Boss Man, a few minutes later, spoiled their plans. Cactus Jack showed he's indestructible, and the Acolytes were an inch away from exploding, but they solved their problems just in time for the Union to deliver a whacking. The Mean Street Posse looked like jokes, and what's even funnier about this match is the fact that it did an 8.6 rating. That was one of the highest rated matches in Raw history. Shamrock dropped China with a belly-to-belly, and as for the main event, the star power was off the charts. The match didn't begin properly, which is an Attitude Era tradition. Everyone's brawling, hitting their finishes, and from out of nowhere, Austin caught Shane with the stunner, and instead of allowing his arch nemesis to win the match, he opted to stun Shane for the second time to win it for himself. That was one hell of a Raw. It was ridiculous in terms of booking, a lot of stuff was happening, and they were rewarded, Nitro wasn't on, and so they got an 8.1 rating that night. In an effort to regain some momentum for the corporate ministry, Shane McMahon booked Stone Cold in a match with Triple H. The Rock had a much tougher task though, as he had to face The Undertaker in a casket match. Taker had felt Rock was a silly little man, and after making a mockery out of caskets and funerals, he promised to send him to a place with no return. The Undertaker claimed that the higher power wanted Austin, and the fans were clamoring for him here. Now, Monday's episode of Raw was supposed to be huge for the corporate ministry. First of all, they had a great start. They managed to do something to the Union's ride and prevent an appearance for the time being. And as for Vince, Shane was ready to bring the fight, and he wasn't joking. The door was locked, but the ministry could care less, and Briscoe and Patterson suggested McMahon search for something in the closet. The Undertaker just popped out from out of nowhere and did a number on the boss. Stone Cold didn't really speak much about The Undertaker, this is something I gotta mention until this segment. As expected, Austin wasn't afraid and even threatened China if she got involved, citing it as a bonus plan for the ministry. As for Sunday, he's ready to beat The Undertaker's ass. The promo was over, but Shane felt it was necessary to talk about his plans for Over the Edge. He warned Austin not to look at him the wrong way or you will lose the title by disqualification. And seeing as Vince was in the hospital, Shane thought he needed a buddy by his side. That plan went south, and instead the Union brawled with the Ministry. Paul Bearer took a stunner, and oddly enough, the man who was craving a fight didn't think it was the right moment. The reasons for this would become apparent in a moment's notice, as the next match on the Warzone was between the Rawk and the Undertaker. Now about this one, the Rawk was at a huge disadvantage with a broken arm. In the back, the mid-card Ministry and the Union continued brawling. Oh, and this is a top 5 people's elbow, I should know. Undertaker was making more mistakes, but it didn't matter because the game and Shane aided him to victory. Triple H had to use a sledgehammer to break that damn arm, and even then, the victory wasn't enough, and Triple H showed that he's more sadistic than the Undertaker by flattening the casket with a sledgehammer. The Green One took a huge battering, and all that was left was the WWF champion. They were in hiding, but their plans were foiled after the Union appeared. This got to a point where the Ministry was like, we had enough. Instead, Triple H had to do the hard work himself. During the match, the Undertaker symbol made its return, and it was a signal for the dead man to appear. The commentary speculated that Austin was possibly the supreme sacrifice, and this is a moment where the other guys came in. They're trying to jump Austin, yada yada yada, and the Union were back. Because of this ongoing chaos, Stone Cold managed to handcuff the Undertaker to his own symbol. He was raging, but Austin could care less and instead flipped the bird at him. All Taker could do is laugh at the fury that was coming Stone Cold's way. Over the Edge is remembered for a very unfortunate tragedy, that being Owen Hart's death. It's a very blurry one, you know, like there was this one time where I was watching 1999 WWF, and I just skipped through it. Like, there's just no reason to watch through the show, honestly. Like, I did watch the main event, but my main thought while watching it wasn't exactly with the match itself. On Heat, Shane McMahon and the Ministry appeared. He claimed that his arm might prevent him from counting 3 for a Stone Cold, and in order to prevent that, the Boy Wonder was going to officiate a match between Mideon and Stone Cold himself. Upon arriving to the arena, McMahon nullified everything Shane booked, but even then the little man decided, hey, you want Stone Cold out of the match? Then you take his spot. He ended up accepting, and meanwhile, Rawk continued roasting Triple H, leading to the game threatening to take that cast off his arm. Instead of getting pissed, he said that the only thing being removed was his boot from Triple H's ass. But back to the big story. First of all, the Union were trapped in this room. This is because Mr. McMahon was relying on them for protection. The match itself was extremely one-sided, and to top it all off, Mideon destroyed his knee. Man, were they wildin' on Heat. So much developments from the show that if you missed it, well, you might be screwed. As for the show, it was off because a man died. I mean, what's there to say? McMahon was loaded onto an ambulance, leaving Shane all alone. The Union, meanwhile, managed to break through and beat the Corporate Ministry in an elimination match. Helmsley got himself disqualified and took a brutal beating from the Great One. And even though his arm was hampering him a bit, it didn't matter to The Rock, and he almost hit the people's elbow, but China made the save, leading to a Mankind run-in. All that was left was the main event. Now, I'm not gonna lie, this was the one match that I actually watched, and it's hard to remember. In Vince's place was Pat Patterson. The Undertaker brought that iconic entrance gear again, and Taker got rid of Patterson with ease. Stone Cold knew that there was no time for preparation and quickly brought the fight. The dead man slowed down the pace, but the champion had these moments where he upped the intensity. Both men were strategically targeting the leg, but it was Austin who easily edged out Taker in this instance. The damage was done there, however, the dissection coming from the challenger didn't end there. They fought in the crowd, and in all honesty, it was a plotting brawl. Punches, slow movement. After wasting so much time, Stone Cold managed to take advantage and had the match won, but Shane experienced Windows 98 lag. Even then, he went 2 for 2 just in time for Gerald Briscoe to enter the match. Now, I should note this was the final third, of course, so you could expect some drama. Briscoe was clotheslined, and all of a sudden, limping Vince made his return. It was anybody's match here. They traded blows, and from out of nowhere, Austin hit the stunner. Family drama leads to a quick roll-up, and Shane counted the pinfall fast, and this meant that the WWF Championship was within the vicinity of the Corporate Ministry. Afterwards, the Ministry came in, and it was like Austin was playing slobber knocker mode with the constant stunners. Okay, this match in particular wasn't special. For one, a man died in the ring. You can't expect them to put on a classic after that. And second, Austin and Taker did not have the best matches together. Obviously, there's some matches that contradict this, but for the most part, that statement is a fact. Here, it was a plotting brawl with the interesting parts few and far between, but again, as I said, you cannot hold that against them. A tragedy had just occurred in that very same ring, and add to that, the crowd was into the match, despite what had happened earlier on. Later that week on Heat, the Texas Rattlesnake finally addressed the events of Sunday. Austin called The Undertaker a big dead SOB and told him that there's no way that the dead man can say he's champion. He then issued the challenge just in time for the new champion to respond. Since he was no chicken, The Undertaker accepted and claimed that a gift was to be bestowed upon Heat, and that gift was Stone Cold himself. He was going to deliver him to the higher power. He wasn't exactly fearful of this and said that he's gonna put his boot in his ass and he'll be drinking beer all night long. Yeah, about that, it wasn't as simple as a straight up title match. Kicking off Raw the next night, the Corporate Ministry along with a couple of druids appeared. The Undertaker bragged about beating Austin and reiterated his statements from the previous night. What was that about? That being the decree of delivering Stone Cold to the higher power. Vince McMahon, though, didn't seem to enjoy all this talk. He called out the controversy from Over the Edge and claimed that he's going to screw The Undertaker. How's that going to be? The Undertaker was defending the World Wrestling Federation title against Stone Cold Steve Austin. However, The boss gave the dead man a chance at kicking his ass. He still held resentment from the abduction thing, but Shane didn't want to do this simply. He said that if Vince beats Taker, then the title match is on. Owen, the Union, and Stone Cold were barred from ringside. But wait, there's more. Shane McMahon even said that if McMahon loses, then Austin can never challenge for the title. Austin washed out on the back because there was huge stakes, and this one was quickly thrown out the window because Taker shoved the referee. While the decision did go his way, Stone Cold was anything but thankful. The corporate ministry didn't have an entirely terrible night though, because the Acolytes managed to win their first tag team titles. But the most important business was on the horizon. About this match, yes, the crowd was electric, they were behind Austin's every move, but as time went on, the champion integrated into the match. Austin wasn't entirely out of it, but the Undertaker was almost indestructible. From out of nowhere, he hit the stunner, and again, Paul Bear ruined everything, leading to the ministry's interference. They tied him up and it was time. The higher power is here, and to give you a refresher on this unknown being, they had been mentioned several times in the past 7 months. This being was referenced to as somebody much greater than the Undertaker, to the point where he'd sacrifice himself for this greater power. It was hyped up so much to the point where it had to be huge. Taker and the rest of the ministry knelt down in anticipation for the higher power's appearance, and at this point, the commentary believed it was Shane because of the constant teases from the Undertaker early on. The higher power didn't reveal themselves then, except to one man. The man that had been a constant thorn in the ministry's side, Stone Cold Steve Austin, and his reaction is like you asked him to wrestle Jeff Jarrett. So before we move on to the big reveal, we gotta look at it from that time period. For some reason, a couple of people believe that the likes of Jake the Snake Roberts, the Jackal, Ted DiBiase, and a certain somebody were better choices. First of all, let's look at Jake Roberts. He was unreliable. If that wasn't the case, well, he would have been the best damn choice. I could just imagine the veil being lifted and his cold, raspy voice on the speaker. It would have made sense because he hated Stone Cold so much because of how he insulted his beliefs and used his misfortune as a launching pad to achieve championship glory. While Austin main evented shows, appeared on talk shows, Jake Roberts fell off. However, he had a lot of issues at the time. This would only get worse as evident by the Heroes of Wrestling show. So there was no way of this happening. The Jackal, great talker, had this charismatic leader presence surrounding him. Add to that, he actually led the Acolytes in the very beginning. But this man had more heat than a kitchen and was already gone a few months earlier. Christopher Daniels, this one is honestly hilarious to me. I'm sure he had a fallen angel character, but he probably wouldn't have been taken seriously, you know? Like Undertaker's hyping this guy up. He reveals himself, it's me, Austin, and nobody knows who he is. Ted DiBiase, similar to Jake Roberts, he had motive. This man brought Steve Austin to the WWF, yet only 5 months later, that same man drove him out of the company. Add to that, he brought The Undertaker to the WWF as well. Again, I can imagine DiBiase removing that hoodie and doing that laugh. Problem was, he trashed pro wrestling in general at the time, saying it's nonsense, this or that at church. And other wild choices could have been Stephanie herself claiming she did this for her own gain or something. And of course there's Shawn Michaels. That would have been huge, and the dynamics are weird of course, but he had his reasonings. You know, McMahon and Austin outed me from the company, and I'm here to reclaim my spot. This couldn't have been done because, for one, HBK was on a lot of stuff at this point. Add to that, he recently went through back surgery in January of '99. There's one more choice, but I'll get to him later on. On Heat, Stone Cold relayed what he saw to a couple of officials, but at the same time decided to unleash hell. This man came out to the ring several times to stun somebody, and when they did try to ask him about the higher power, he refused to say, stating he wasn't even here tonight anyways. He went on yet another stunner rampage. Look, that man was so powerful, the air stunned the ref. And it's definitely a memorable moment from the history of Heat. Kicking off Raw the next night, wrong show, on Nitro, Eric Bischoff managed to correctly guess who the higher power was despite Raw being alive an hour later. This was in spite of a bunch of speculation over other potential guys. Okay, there was a lot of hype for this greater power reveal, as evident by Vince kicking off the show to talk trash about him. The boss claimed that he had already met him and listed names that were rumored at the time, and he basically shot down those rumors. But that wasn't it, you see. McMahon wanted to face his son in a winner-take-all match. The winner earns 100% of the company's power. Shane accepted and denied being the higher power, but nonetheless it was almost time. Stone Cold, meanwhile, was discussing something with somebody in a limousine, and once more, The Undertaker started talking about how grand this greater power is and gave him a lengthy introduction. The ministry showed respect to this figure, and one thing to mention is that Shane McMahon wasn't the higher power because there he was. Now things got interesting, and the commentary was confused. They were heavily reliant on Shane McMahon being the higher power, but that wasn't the case. Although the King was fearful of Jake the Snake Roberts being the higher power, Shane made this guy seem like he was supernatural, and you'd be thinking it was the devil himself. He bestowed the honor upon Vince to reveal the greater power. Vince opted to stay in the back and asked the evil demonic figure to reveal himself. And there he was. And I've seen this a million times, but I was on the floor. Because watching the whole story, it gives off a different perspective. You see McMahon transition from this cold-hearted villain to a man with so much sympathy. And the way it's booked, there was no chance in hell was he intended to be the first choice. Hell no. As a result of this reveal, criticism from some was drawn on how the reveal couldn't live up to the expectations that the storyline had built. Here's what Bruce Pritchard had to say on Something to Wrestle last year. And I quote, "I think we landed on Vince just out of not having anybody strong enough to put in that position to bring it back to what worked and what people were comfortable with and what they knew. Was that the right decision? I think that will be left up to debate for everyone else to debate. I think it was an opportunity to introduce somebody new and something different. I wasn't a fan of the reveal. Actually, I wasn't a fan of it being Vince. I was kind of like, can we get beyond that? That was, I believe, the original intent. But then as you got there, you realize, well, it's not done yet. There's still more meat left on this bone, so let's go grab what we can grab with Vince. Vince is a natural antagonist to Stone Cold Steve Austin, and to this day, people love that dynamic of Mr. McMahon and Stone Cold. It was a very natural rivalry and easy to relate to. Pritchard also acknowledged the issues of having McMahon himself as a higher power. There's holes big time. He kidnapped his daughter, burned up in teddy bear just to get Steve to trust him and come on board, just to say, haha, I got you. Yeah, there's definitely holes, but at the same time, I think had it been able to go on longer, where you actually saw Vince and Austin together a little bit longer and really believe that trust, then you would have had me hooked. But it was so fast. Frankly, I think that was the original plan, that the higher power would be somebody, yet there would be the evil emperor above the higher power. Personally, it was basically a best case scenario at the time. You can't really expect somebody that nobody knew to deliver in that position. If it were Christopher Daniels, you'd probably hear crickets at the time. The other guys, as I mentioned, were unavailable, and one man in particular that I forgot to mention was Mankind. This is the name that I seen passed around while making this video, and apparently there were reports at the time that he turned it down. Personally, I don't think it would have been good. The Undertaker was throwing this guy off cells and caused more harm to his body than anybody else. Why would the leader of the ministry get down on his knees for this guy? Also, I liked Mankind's evolution from a deranged, bitter person to a very likable family man. It was just unnecessary. Now, on the McMahon reveal, we talked about the bad. Let's look at it from another perspective. The whole thing showed that he was truly insane, and judging from his character, he would actually do all of this to prevent Austin from being champion. As we all know, he hated that man with a passion, and week after week tried to screw him over numerous times. It wasn't out of character for him to play the fans with this scheme. Unfortunately, though, the way some of it was booked, he broke his leg, he took a chair shot and all that, makes it weird. Back to your scheduled program. Vince bloated about fooling the fans and placed the blame on Stone Cold for all of this. He said that there's no price he won't pay to make Austin's life a living hell. He thanked Shane, The Undertaker, and the rest of the ministry, and all of a sudden Linda and Stephanie came out. They asked the big question: why? McMahon said it was business, and speaking of business, this is when the whole thing goes south, Linda informed him that neither McMahon owns 50% of the company, rather it was equally split between the four of them, and because of this, she stepped down as the CEO of the company, and with this came a lot of changes to the way the company was structured. The moment Linda said that the employees could drink on the job, the fans went crazy. As for the successor, it was him, and McMahon was looking like he was in hell. The tie is a nice touch, and basically, whatever Shane and Vince were building, it quickly went to hell once the higher power was revealed to Austin the previous week. The Texas rattlesnake began to speak in a corporate manner, and it just sounded so odd. First of all, he confirmed his title shot, and second, Austin booked himself in a handicap match against the McMahons. They tried to sound tough, but the new CEO shut them up by booking the Boy Wonder in a handicap match against X-Pac and Kane. Oh, and the Union could face anybody they want. Triple H gets to face The Rock in a cast match. It sounds stupid, but the game was raging like someone barred him from speaking on the microphone. So basically, this was a colossal L in storyline. Months were spent trying to build the story. Women were sacrificed. Men were hung. All that happened just for Stone Cold to come in and throw that ID in the trash next to a copy of King of the Ring 1995. Very electric segment. Even if you don't like the reveal, it was entertaining as hell with the crowd following along the entire thing. That said, Shane was saved by the posse. Triple H got his. Well, almost, because the Undertaker saved the game yet again. Oh, and the Big Show wanted the dead man, whereas Shamrock wanted Vince because he was wronged earlier on. Vince was like a kid trying to prevent an ass whooping from his parents, but once the cage opened, he was done. I'm referring to Shamrock because Jeff Jarrett smacked the living hell out of him in the shot. That shot is low-key one of the hardest I've ever heard or I've ever seen. McMahon's ran the hell out of there soon afterwards. All that was left was the main event. For one, it's a title match, and two, they broke the ring. Big Show opted to send The Undertaker down to Hornswoggle's house. As a result of this, the title match was over. Big Show dropped the rest of the ministry to end the show on top. Kicking off the June 14th episode of Raw's War, Stone Cold was shown being the worst, translation, best CEO in the world. He changed the employees' attitudes to be more in line with his. He fired guys, hired men who were deemed unqualified for the job. There's some very fun segments due to the uniqueness of it. Austin wasn't exactly shown operating in everyday type situations, such as an office, and it's awesome to see him try to bring his style to the work office. Meanwhile, Mr. McMahon denied any sort of tensions within the corporate ministry, and he even said, that's not going to happen tonight, that's not going to happen any night. Austin chants intensified as the McMahons were deciding what the King of the Ring match stipulation could be. They considered a bunch of mid-card-esque matches, such as a blindfold match, but in the end, this segment dragged. So let's skip a little. The Stooges had an issue with Vince's recent actions and were booked to face Mideon and Viscera. Fast forward to later, and the Grey One told The Undertaker that he has checked himself directly into the SmackDown hotel with his actions last week. He made the champion's taunt seem like some childish stuff. He asked him to put the title on the line. After roasting the dead man for several minutes, he had enough. Taker tried to verbally teach him a lesson and accepted the challenge for King of the Ring. All of a sudden, though, McMahon put a stop to this. Why? Because he wanted to place obstacles in the way. So he booked the match that ended up being detrimental to the corporate ministry. In a little way, I should note. After Austin ruined his company, Mr. McMahon had enough and wanted to put up his share, along with Shane's. Of course, Austin puts his share on the table for a ladder match, winner take all. Before they could announce Rock's stipulation for the main event, Shane was seeing stars as a result of a belly-to-belly from Ken Shamrock. But on the topic of The Rock, he had to face Triple H and The Undertaker in a handicap match in order to earn the title match at King of the Ring. During the match, things were going terribly for the duo, and to make matters worse, they were bumping into each other. China wronged the wrong person, Triple H got angry, and Taker indirectly cost himself in the game of the match, making Rock the #1 contender. And what's that saying? Not tonight, not any night. Well, this directly contradicts that. The rest of the ministry had to come out and separate them, and even then the game still wanted a fight. This of course boiled over to heat, where Triple H said that he has one goal in mind, and that's to be the WWF champion. He didn't care if it was Stone Cold or The Undertaker who was champion. The dead man meanwhile was anything but worried over The Rock. But the more interesting part of this interview was about Triple H. JR claimed that the game didn't respect the dead man, and he showed that his temper was shorter than Andre's title reign. He said that if anyone had issues with him, they could come and deal with them. For all that talk, Taker ended up being the one who brought the fight to the game, and the McMahons were nowhere to be found, and similar to Raw, it was all up to the corporate ministry to prevent them from fighting. They had to wait until Monday, and it wasn't even them who started the show. It was instead an incensed Hunter Hearst Helmsley who called for his dead ass to come out. The rest of the ministry came just in time to prevent this thing from going down. Austin finally accepted the ladder match challenge and added the stipulation of his own. If the corporate ministry interfere, well, he owns 100% of the company. They turned it into a no-holds-barred match, and it was time for one of the random HBK appearances. He's donning a Spurs shirt, of course, and entered through the Brute's platform. To resolve this issue, Stone Cold faces a corporate ministry member, and if somebody from the ministry interferes, Austin gets full control. But if it goes down normally, the winner gets to choose their stipulation. McMahon chose The Undertaker to represent him, but he was booked, so it was going to be Triple H. That wasn't going to be either. Because The Undertaker was defending his title against Triple H, it was going to be the big boss man, and to prevent any interference, HBK is the special guest referee. In an effort to ease the competition, The Undertaker tombstoned The Rock. The boss man fell victim as he always did to Austin, and to gain some heat, the McMahons wanted to use the ladder, but Stone Cold flipped Vince over, and he let out the anger on the Stooges and the big boss man, who he ended up kicking out of the ministry and eventually firing. As for the title match, it was intense. The Rock interfered and ruined everything for Triple H before calling for this goofy-ass Brahma Bull symbol. Smoke was blowing from it, and the boss man of all people saved The Rock because the ministry had attacked him early on. The Rock then told The Undertaker that he's going to stick the horns up this candy ass, and so basically, from my perspective, Paul Bearer was just tied up for no reason other than to mock The Undertaker. On heat, Mr. McMahon once again assured everyone that there's no cracks in the corporate ministry, instead claiming it's friction. HBK once again rained on their parade after hearing the McMahons say they could fight all night. So he booked the match between Vince and Shamrock. Man, they were really on something because this damn stuff was happening on heat. Obviously, it ends in interference or something stupid, but it's cool to see that they put effort into the pre-show. Anyways, Michaels was fair and asked if Vince wanted to find a replacement. Unfortunately for him, everyone was booked except for the Acolytes, but HBK likened them to the Olsen twins. It's very hard to explain. All that was left was Shane, and his reaction is like he was going on a road trip with 1995 HBK. Once again, the corporate ministry is barred from ringside about that match. Well, this is heat. I mean, what do you expect? Steve Blackman, of all people, interfered, and Shane was left unscathed. The Rock, meanwhile, gave his final thoughts on his title match with The Undertaker, and after roasting his 33-pound head, his Mickey Mouse tattoos, the dead man shut him up and did something about that symbol. Moving on to the show itself, yes, Shane was hurting, and it was an awkward situation for Vince himself, who canceled the match. Like HBK had been annoying him in the back for years, he did the same thing over here. It was like real life. HBK got what he wanted. So Mr. McMahon asked for a replacement. In other places, The Rock and The Undertaker had one of the world-famous Attitude Era brawls, and once they entered the ring, The Rock never seemed to click just yet. The champion applied a lot of pressure to him and tried to keep him down, and it took time, but The Rock was finally back in it. He hits the people's elbow, but the ref was knocked down. Paul Bearer brought out that ether, and it went to the wrong person. Helmsley, though, hated The Rock so much that it cost the match, and even then, The Rock kicked out. The Undertaker ended up hitting the tombstone to retain it, and this match, honestly, I don't see why you should watch it. If you're a big Attitude Era person, then that's a different story. Also, if you're a fan of The Rock, The Undertaker, maybe you will enjoy it, but it's not like stand out. It's not one of those main events that we know from the Attitude Era. This interference was catastrophic for the corporate ministry because Triple H was kicked out of the arena, so Vince had to call somebody on the phone. Turns out, Steve Blackman was the partner for all of 2 minutes because Goldust decided to expose him. Steve Blackman was kicked out, and Stone Cold had momentum on his side like he was the '99 Spurs while the McMahons were the 99 Knicks. Low-key, this is a match I like. It clearly wasn't going to be revolutionary or even a memorable affair, at least for the action, but looking at the situation itself with Shane and Vince, yeah, it was good enough. Austin the entire time was dropping them, throwing them into ladders, and at one point dropped all these ladders onto them. He dived through tables, and it was everything that it needed to be. I mean, you weren't expecting them to hit DDTs off ladders or anything like that. He dished out a 15-minute beatdown, and when it was time to retrieve the briefcase, somebody raised it. Austin couldn't really do anything about it, and the McMahons finally took advantage of the numbers to win it. Decent match, not must-watch or anything like that, but if you're going to watch it, I assume you're going to enjoy it if you like the matches from this era. If you don't, well, that's a different story. Since my video got delayed due to some rendering issues, I listened to Bruce Pritchard's podcast, Something to Wrestle, about King of the Ring 1999. And he spoke about the possibility of somebody else raising the briefcase. It wasn't always supposed to be Boss Man, and they actually considered other people. And here's what he had to say about that. The story was there, and you could have got another layer to the story. Instead, it was just, okay, they sold the company back, we're back to where we were, and it was a reset. It just was anticlimactic as you're a viewer and you're waiting for the payoff, and your payoff is, well, nothing's changed. So it was underwhelming to me, and it was a lack of planning or just a lack of not really knowing where the hell they wanted to go. He was then asked about the possibility of it being somebody other than the big boss man. It was someone like that. The original germ of the idea was, what if it was like a Linda or a Stephanie or someone like that had been on Austin's side prior to that, and then it was within Boss Man had taken over. There were a lot of different things that were bandied about, but the original germ of the idea was for someone to double-cross Austin. Alright, I think that would have been interesting as well, but I don't know how they would have went about it, because the WWF 99 was kind of wild, and they were doing some random-ass stuff just for the sake of it. I don't know. The very next night on Raw's War, you're expecting Stone Cold to have a terrible night. Nope. It was the contrary. The corporate ministry came out and the crowd was excited. McMahon guaranteed that this will never be a forgotten night, and I gotta say, he ain't wrong. Shane McMahon fired Stone Cold as CEO, and they said that he will be at the bottom as an in-ring performer. Since he was that, Stone Cold was wrestling in the opening match and will disassemble the ring after the show. Vince announced the Undertaker and Triple H match were fully loaded, and all of a sudden the Big Boss Man with the Hard Time song comes out. Turns out this was all a scheme. It was all a scheme. They kicked him out of the ministry in order for him to raise the briefcase, and they had him rejoin the very next night. That's the story, basically. The Undertaker was apparently too cool for all of this, of course, and the boos would soon turn into cheers as Stone Cold interrupted. Knowing very well that he could be screwed, Austin made sure to sign a new contract and remove the whole no-touch rule from a while ago. Other than that, he did nothing. Just book a title match the night after King of the Ring, and upon hearing this, they were pissed. Oh, and I should note the corporate minister are barred from ringside. Fast forward to the end of the night, and this is a very memorable matchup from the Attitude Era. And it wasn't because of the action, rather the occasion. Because this is the highest rated segment, cable I should note, in wrestling history. It did a 9.5, which saw almost 11 million people watch The Undertaker and Stone Cold face off, and it also helped that Nitro ended a bit early. The match itself wasn't noteworthy, basic action, but people were invested in the characters a lot, so that helps. Austin caught Undertaker with a stunner, but Paul Bearer ruined everything, and it didn't matter though, because Austin hit yet another stunner, and all was normal again because the WWF title was back to its rightful owner. The Undertaker though didn't appreciate this and whacked the new champion in the face with the title. Stone Cold was bleeding, yet was forcing a comeback, but unfortunately for him, the Undertaker was far too much here. By heat, it had become apparent that the Undertaker craved blood. Not anyone's though, he wanted Austin's. The Dead Man issued a challenge for Fully Loaded First Blood match. Austin responded the very next night on Raw, and he told McMahon that he crumbled up his plans and shoved it in his ass, and yes, he accepted the match. I mean, this guy would accept that challenge from his grandma. He said that it was right for the match to be First Blood because Payback's a and an incensed McMahon stormed down and said that he's got something to say. You see, McMahon was so annoyed with Austin as a champion that he risked it all. If Stone Cold wins, he will never have anything to do with him again. However, if it goes the other way, Austin could never even attempt to challenge for the title. You see, Steve Austin was marketable. He was a notable face, but as champion, it causes a whole lot of issues for McMahon. He's not corporate friendly, but regardless, Austin on the roster makes him cash, He's better off on the roster making him money than having him fired. It's just not best for the company's image that he be champion. That's basically my perspective as to how Vince goes about things. McMahon went on to add that if The Undertaker loses, McMahon, is gone. Fans went crazy upon hearing that, I should know. After suffering a motorcycle accident, the boss came out to the contract signing in a wheelchair. Instead of signing straight up, he dragged the contract signing like it was an 8-minute YouTube video. First up, he refused to sign until Stone Cold does. Austin was going to, but demanded the Smoke and Skull title. Lights went out and suddenly Kane's music played, but turns out this was a setup and the Undertaker blasted him with a title, and instead of signing the contract like a normal person, McMahon signed it with Austin's own blood. The champion was downright pissed, and the Big Show felt it was necessary that he had help because on the side, the Undertaker was trying to recruit Kane. That's a bit of a different story. About that, yes, Austin was busted open again, but unlike last week, he stood tall. On the final Raw before Fully Loaded, tensions arose within the corporate ministry. McMahon said that his career wasn't the only one on the line because Undertaker's was as well, and once he heard this, he didn't take it lightly. You see, his problem with Austin was personal. Clearly, Vince wanted to show who's the boss, and Taker had this confused look on his face. Seeing as Triple H likes to get involved in everything, he did that here, and it was something. He asked McMahon to place him in the title match, and this convinced the boss to have a number one contenders match with the winner facing Austin at Fully Loaded, while the loser faces Rawk in a number one contenders match for SummerSlam. Suddenly, Stone Cold's music plays, and he's out here with a bloodmobile. Makes sense. The Undertaker wants blood, and he's about to get locked in the truck. Austin also said that he was going to donate a part of Vince's blood, and as a result of this, he had to be guarded by Triple H the entire night. The number one contenders match went the Undertaker's way, and afterwards, Austin gave everyone a preview of Fully Loaded. He launched the dead man into the bloodmobile and finally got his hands on McMahon. The defenseless McMahon took a couple of shots directly to the face with the title, and there was nobody to save him. Triple H was busy with The Rawk, Shane was nowhere to be found, and The Undertaker was locked up. Austin signed the contract, and the match was confirmed. All was good on his side, but then The Undertaker returned and opened up that wound again. It didn't help that The Undertaker opened him up on heat as well. What this meant was, his chances increased gradually, while Austin's drastic go down. An extremely angry Rattlesnake ruined Jeff Jarrett's night by randomly hitting a stunner on him and told the dead SOB that he's entering the match the same way he is. Well, Stone Cold said it was true because he attacked The Undertaker and he bled. Now, about the first blood match, I liked it. It's like any other Attitude Era match. It doesn't stand out because Undertaker hit a moonsault or something, but it just clicked well. I'm not saying it's match of the year. Matter of fact, there's some that don't even like this match, and there's a part of it that kind of drags, but it picked up. Austin knew that forcing Taker to bleed would be an uphill battle, so he went after the knee for a while. He inflicted damage to the face, but no results were found. Taker was stuck on the ropes at one point, and Shane had to save him by taking a shot of his own. It was so bad for the ministry at this point that Vince got involved. Taker did bounce back, but after attacking X-Pac earlier on, paid the price for it and took a spin kick with a chair to the face. Austin grabs a TV camera, and there he is bleeding. Crowd's going wild. Shane's taking a beating, and all that was left was for the ref to verify. He's busted. Ref takes a right hand. Vince is sad, but it didn't matter because he took a stunner. Helmsley, the number one contender, made a run before The Rawk followed up. Undertaker and Austin were still battling, and because he couldn't see anything, he nailed Shane. It was electrifying, and after all of this, Stone Cold wanted to wish McMahon goodbye. How? By hitting a stunner. Very exciting main event. The Attitude Era formula just worked, you know. The final third of the matches are always must watch. It doesn't matter what happens early on, they always bring it near the end. Mr. McMahon was gone, and basically in storyline, the corporate ministry was a failure. The boss spent all of his time to form a plan, and Stone Cold not only fooled it, pissed on its grave. Shane announced that the corporate ministry was no more the following week, and so that's the run. Honestly, when I compare it to the ministry, I just don't like it as much. The Undertaker, I feel like he let himself go a bit here. Like, once Vince came in, it was like a different story. The Shane McMahon partnership was kind of interesting. But once Vince comes in, he was just a lackey, which is weird because he was the leader initially of the ministry, and he should have been much more of a focal point, you know? He was a focal point, all that, but it's like he took a back seat to the McMahons in a way. He's talking about this greater power, and it ended up being Vince, of all people. It was surprising. It's hilarious to this very day. It's often quoted, you know, it's me, Austin. So that's cool. And like I said, they didn't really have many choices for the reveal. But after the reveal, I feel like the corporate ministry fell off, honestly. It felt like the Corporation 2.0 with The Undertaker in The Rock's position, basically. Could have gone down better, but they didn't have an idea of who the higher power was from the very beginning, which kind of hurt it in a way. Now, as I said earlier, The Undertaker wasn't really a fan of his ministry gimmick, and I remember this from an old WWF documentary. Seen some clip of it a long time ago. But if you want to read what he said about it, here it is from The Undertaker Dead Man Walking, and I quote, "The ministry was kind of the last facet of the dark side stuff," Mark said. "I'm not sure it was a good idea to have the ministry join with the corporation," said Mark. "It was all about the McMahons and meant that The Undertaker was no longer leading the pack." Yeah, I agree with that, you know, like, as I said earlier, with the Shane thing, it wasn't bad or anything like that, but once Vince came along, that's a different story. I should also mention that I didn't add the culmination of the Rawk Triple H feud because I started work on a video relating to that feud, and I thought it was unnecessary to add it here because we're just saving it for that video. Alright, what did you guys think of the corporate ministry? Please comment down below, and that's it for this video. Make sure you hit the tombstone pile driver on the like button, or perhaps the pedigree and the subscribe button. Peace, I'm out.